Perhaps today you feel that your life is standing still. You work, you do what you're supposed to do every day. You try to move forward. But deep inside your heart, there is a quiet question that appears from time to time. Was I created for something more? Many people live with that feeling. Everything seems normal on the outside, but inside there is a restlessness that does not disappear. It is as if there were a purpose waiting to be discovered, a direction that has not yet become completely clear. The Bible says in Matthew 4:19, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." With such simple words, Jesus spoke an invitation that would change the lives of several people forever. It was not a long speech or a complicated explanation. It was a direct and powerful call that touched the hearts of those who heard it. In the previous episode of this series, we saw the first miracle of Jesus at the wedding in Cana, when water was transformed into wine. That moment was not only a demonstration of power, it was also the beginning of something much greater. That miracle revealed that when Jesus intervenes, the ordinary can become extraordinary. But what many people did not imagine was that the greatest miracle about to happen would not take place in the jars of water, but in the lives of the people who decided to walk with him. Because following Jesus did not simply mean listening to his teachings or witnessing miracles. It meant entering a process of transformation that would change the way they thought, the way they lived, and the way they understood the purpose of their lives. To understand what happened next, we must imagine what life was like for those men before they truly knew Jesus. Many of his first followers were simple fishermen who spent their days by the sea, casting their nets again and again, hoping to catch enough to live. Simon, later known as Peter, and his brother Andrew were two of those men. For them, the sea was not just a beautiful place. It was their livelihood, their security, and their future. The nets in their hands represented everything they knew, their history, their identity, and the life they had always lived. But one day everything changed. Jesus walked along the shore and saw them working as they had done every other day. From the outside, the scene seemed ordinary. Yet in that moment, something extraordinary was about to begin. Jesus approached them and said simple words filled with meaning. "Follow me." He did not promise comfort and did not explain every step of the journey. He simply invited them to walk with him. And in that invitation there was something powerful, something that awakened a new vision inside their hearts. For the first time they realized their lives could be greater than the routine they had always known. In that moment, they began to understand that following Jesus would mean more than changing direction. It would mean transforming their lives. The Bible describes something that, when we think about it carefully, is truly surprising. After hearing those words from Jesus, those men made an immediate decision. They did not ask for time to think about it. They did not ask what the future would look like or what they would gain in return. They simply left their nets and followed him. It may seem like a simple scene when we read it in just a few lines, but in reality it was a deeply radical moment. The nets they left behind were not just tools for work. They represented their stability, their security, and everything they had known until that moment. Leaving them behind meant letting go of the only life they had ever lived in order to walk towards something completely unknown. Imagine it for a moment. In front of them was the sea that had defined their lives for years. The boats, the nets, and the sound of the water were familiar. It was the place where they knew exactly what to do every day. But Jesus was inviting them to something different, to a path where they would not control every step. Following Jesus meant trusting before understanding. It meant believing that there was a greater purpose, even when they could not yet see it clearly. And that is one of the reasons why that moment is so powerful. Because the transformation in their lives did not begin when everything was clear. It began when they decided to take the first step. From that moment on, the lives of those men would never be the same. They would begin to witness teachings that challenged the ideas of their time, miracles that revealed the power of God in unexpected ways, and moments that would completely change the way they understood the world. But the most important thing was not only what they would see, it was what would begin to change inside them. Because when a person decides to walk close to Jesus, something inside begins to transform, and that change often becomes the beginning of a completely new story. Over time, those men began to realize something they had never imagined. Following Jesus was not simply walking behind a teacher. It was entering a process of inner transformation that changed the way they saw life, other people, and even themselves. Before meeting him, their world had been small. Their horizon was limited to the sea, their nets, and the daily routine of survival. But Jesus began to show them a different perspective. He spoke to them about the kingdom of God, about a spiritual reality far greater than what they could see with their own eyes. Each teaching opened a new way of thinking, and every miracle strengthened their conviction. Little by little, they began to discover something greater. Their lives had a purpose. Over the course of the days, those men began to understand that walking with Jesus was not only about learning new teachings. It was about experiencing a real transformation that touched every part of their lives. What once seemed impossible began to become part of their reality. They saw the sick being healed, people who were lost finding hope, and hardened hearts beginning to change. But the most impressive thing was not only what was happening around them, it was what was happening within them. Those fishermen, who had once lived simple lives without great expectations, began to discover that God could use their lives in a much greater way than they had ever imagined. Jesus did not choose famous people or the most respected leaders of his time. He chose ordinary people, men with doubts, weaknesses, and simple stories. And that reveals something deeply important. God's purpose does not begin with perfection. It begins with willingness. Every conversation with Jesus, every journey, and every moment listening to his teachings began shaping something new inside them. Little by little, their way of thinking began to change, and their vision of the world started to expand. They no longer saw themselves only as fishermen. They began to understand that their lives could impact other people. And perhaps here, there is a very important connection with your own life. Many times we think we need to be extraordinary for God to do something great through us. But the story of the disciples shows exactly the opposite. God can begin something powerful, even in the simplest lives when someone decides to listen to the call and walk with faith. That is why the greatest miracle Jesus performed was not only turning water into wine or healing the sick. The greatest miracle was transforming ordinary lives into stories filled with purpose. And that transformation is still possible today. And this is where this story stops being only a story from the past and begins to speak directly to our lives today. Because when we observe the transformation of those men, we discover something very profound. They were not different from us. They had doubts, fears, responsibilities, and lives marked by routine. But when they decided to walk with Jesus, they began to discover something new. God's purpose is often revealed while you move forward, not before. Maybe today you are also in a similar moment. If this message touched your heart, write in the comments, "God is with me." And if we observe the full story of the disciples, we discover something that often goes unnoticed. The transformation that began when they decided to follow Jesus did not happen overnight. It was a process. There were moments of learning, moments of doubt, and also moments when their faith was tested. They witnessed incredible miracles, heard teachings that changed the way they thought, and walked with Jesus through situations that challenged everything they had ever known. Yet even then, they were still learning and still growing. Because purpose is not revealed all at once. It is revealed along the journey. And that is something very important to remember. Many people think that in order to discover their purpose, they must have everything clear from the beginning. But the story of the disciples shows something different. They discovered who they were called to become while walking with Jesus, step by step. Perhaps today you are also in that process. Maybe you still cannot clearly see everything that God is preparing for your life. But that does not mean your story is standing still. Many times, while it seems that nothing extraordinary is happening, God is shaping something inside you That is why this series is so important. Each episode allows us to understand a little more about how Jesus taught, how he transformed lives, and how those teachings continue to have a deep impact even today. And if this is the first video you are watching in this series, I encourage you to start from the beginning. Each episode is connected, and together they form a path of reflection that can help you better understand the purpose, faith, and direction that God can bring into your life. When we look back at what happened in the lives of those men, it is impossible not to notice something extraordinary. Those simple fishermen who once left their nets by the sea eventually carried a message that would change the history of the world. What began as a simple invitation, "Follow me," became a transformation that impacted generations. But the most powerful part of this story is that it is not only about them. It reveals something profound about how God works in the lives of people. He does not look for perfect lives or for people who already have everything figured out. He calls ordinary people. If this message touched your heart, write in the comments, "God is with me," and don't miss the next episode of this series. Perhaps while you were listening to this story, something inside you began to awaken. Maybe it reminded you of moments in your own life when you felt that there was something more waiting for you, something greater than the daily routine, something you still cannot fully explain, but that is there quietly calling your attention. The story of the disciples reminds us that many transformations begin in simple ways. They do not begin with absolute certainty or perfectly defined plans. They begin when a person decides to take a step, trust a little more, and open their heart to the possibility that God may be guiding their path. Those men did not know that their lives would be remembered for centuries, nor that their decision to follow Jesus would impact millions of people. They simply responded to a calling, and it was in their daily walk, in every teaching they heard and every challenge they faced, that their identity began to change little by little. Perhaps today your life is also in a moment of process. Maybe you cannot yet see the entire path ahead, but that does not mean your story is standing still. Many times the most important moments in our lives begin when we decide to trust even before we see the result. So remember something simple but powerful. Your life has a purpose, and your story is still being written. When you choose to walk with faith, even the smallest steps can open paths that once seemed impossible. If this message helped you reflect, write in the comments, "God is with me." Share this message with someone who may also need to hear it, and continue watching this series to discover teachings that can bring direction, peace, and purpose to your life. Because when you understand that God walks with you, each day stops being just a routine and becomes part of a much greater story. Before finishing this episode, remember something important. Great transformations do not begin when everything is clear. They begin when someone decides to respond to an inner calling. That is how the story of those men by the sea began. A normal day, a simple invitation, and a decision that seemed small but would change their lives forever. And that same principle is still true today. When you choose to walk with faith, something inside you begins to change. Your way of seeing life shifts, and little by little an ordinary life begins to reveal a much greater purpose. And now that we have reached the end of this episode, I want to leave you with one final reflection. Many times we think that the stories we read in the Bible belong to a distant time, to people who lived in circumstances completely different from our own. But when we look carefully at the lives of the disciples, we discover something surprising. Their struggles, their doubts, and their journeys are very similar to ours. They also experienced moments of uncertainty. There were times when they did not fully understand what was happening. There were situations when fear appeared and their faith was tested. And yet it was precisely in the middle of that process that their character began to grow stronger and their purpose slowly began to be revealed. The transformation they experienced was not instant, but it was real. Every step they took with Jesus brought them closer to the mission God had prepared for their lives, and that same truth still applies today. Your life is also in process. Even when it seems that nothing extraordinary is happening, God may be working quietly within you, preparing something that you still cannot see. If this episode helped you reflect, write in the comments, "God is with me." That simple phrase can remind us that we are not walking alone in our story. I also invite you to continue watching this entire series. Each episode is connected, and together they reveal teachings that can bring clarity, hope, and direction for life. In the next episode, we will discover something very special: how Jesus maintained clarity and purpose even in moments of great pressure and difficulty. Because when you understand your purpose, you begin to walk with a completely different confidence. If you made it this far, I want to tell you something important. The fact that you listened to this message until the end shows that inside you there is a desire to understand more deeply the purpose of life, faith, and the path that God may have prepared for you. So I invite you to continue this journey of reflection by watching the next episode of the series. Because when you begin to understand your purpose, your story starts to take on a completely different meaning.